it's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, everybody. I am Geoff Arbuckle, and this is Monster Mondays presented to you by Film Seizure. Now, interestingly enough, you probably heard the Godzilla opening that I do whenever I do a Godzilla movie. This is a return to the Heisei era of the Godzilla movies. Some time ago, I had done the first 4 movies, and then it was time to kind of pick that back up here, and we're going to conclude the Heisei era of Godzilla, as well as the general Heisei era of Toho Productions when I close out this month with Rebirth of Mothra 3. But we'll get there when we get there. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla II is 1993, and this is very, very much a part of the overarching 7 films that made up the Heisei Godzilla era. It is directly sequelizing the 4 films that came before it, starting with Return of Godzilla, then Godzilla vs. Biollante, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, and Godzilla vs. Mothra. Now, this one, while it is completely and totally sequelized and in order, really is a little bit more of a sequel to the 3rd film, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, more so than it is truly connected to the Godzilla vs. Mothra. Now, just to kind of catch everybody up here again on the Heisei period. The Heisei period beginning, like I said, with Return of Godzilla in 1984 as the kind of 30th anniversary of the first Godzilla movie. Brought back Godzilla. They were acting as a sequel directly off of the first film, brought back Godzilla as a villain. And throughout the entire series, and actually the following series that will come up when we get to that, which is the Millennium era, Godzilla is a bad guy. Gone are the days of the 60s and 70s movies in which Godzilla had a friendly personality. Godzilla has a personality in these movies. He is just a villain. Interestingly enough, also, though, they keep with the idea that while Godzilla is indeed a villain and a threat to humanity, he is 100% the fault of people. And the things that we had done, particularly with nuclear power and our weaponry and the way that we were using Earth. More so, while that first film was successful enough to continue doing Godzilla movies, it's not exactly well liked, even though I do quite like it, but I have a little bit of nostalgia for it from seeing it on TV when it was imported over. It was imported over by Roger Corman, of all people, too. But really, this series gets into its own life with the second film, which was Godzilla vs. Biollante. That's where we are introduced to characters like Miki Seguza, who is really, outside of Godzilla, really the only significant recurring character that ever existed in this series, in any of the eras, and any of the runs of the movies. So she was a psychic, and it really kind of delved into a little bit more of a metaphysical and spiritual side of telling a story about these giant monsters kind of rampaging around. And this movie takes advantage of a lot of that, and I'll talk a little bit about that here in just a moment. But this was originally intended to be the final film of this Heisei period. It was really meant to avoid conflict with the upcoming American Godzilla that Columbia and TriStar were putting together. Now, I will never talk about that movie on this show. That movie is terrible. I can't find 3 things that I like about that movie, so I'm never going to talk about it on Monster Mondays, where I am out there, even for bad movies, finding 3 things that I like. You heard how much of a struggle I had last week with slugs. Godzilla, the first American Godzilla is, I can't do it. But it was also meant to kind of honor the recent passing of Godzilla's creator, Ishiro Honda, who had just passed away as this movie was kind of getting kicked off. And there is kind of a little bit of a feel of that at the end of this movie, that this was meant to be kind of the last one. However, their goal to go out was to make this a remake of King Kong vs. Godzilla. However, Toho could not get the rights from Universal for the King Kong character, which is interesting because Universal's relationship with the King Kong character is a fascinating one. They kept claiming that they had rights to the character even when they didn't have the rights at one point. There's a whole long story about Universal's quote-unquote ownership of King Kong in the late 70s and early 80s, how it created a lawsuit with Nintendo Corporation when Donkey Kong was created. So it's a very fascinating story. I don't really have time to go into it at this point, though. Now, they then considered to use Mechanicong, which was from the King Kong Escapes movie that was kind of a sequel to that original King Kong vs. Godzilla movie that Toho made in the 60s. But they really didn't want to risk a lawsuit that Mechanicong was too closely related to King Kong, so they dropped that idea. So they decided, well, let's just bring back Mechagodzilla. Mothra and Ghidorah in the two previous movies were quite popular with fans, so they thought, well, let's bring back Mechagodzilla. What they did also was they brought along Rodan. And so they were basically repurposing and recreating some of their more popular older characters for this modern era. So this movie begins in 1992. This is 1 year after the events of Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. A robotic piece of the Mecha King Ghidorah creature that was sent back from the future to try to rid the world of Godzilla is reverse engineered to build Mechagodzilla. And this leads to the formation of what is called G-Force, which is put together by the United Nations Godzilla Countermeasures Center, which is UNGCC. G-Force would play a part in the rest of the series. It actually becomes a very popular piece of Godzilla lore, appearing in video games and the like, but it was got its first appearance in this film. Now, meanwhile, there is a science team that finds an egg on an island, and they believe that it is a pteranodon egg. Well, what ends up happening is this attracts the attention of Rodan, who is a mutated pteranodon, and Godzilla, which was always considered to be a mutated Tyrannosaurus Rex, but then it was later called a mutated Godzillasaurus in the Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah movie. Now, an interesting point that I want to point out, and it kind of cracks me up throughout this whole movie. I watched the English dub of this, and in the English dub, for whatever reason, despite there being a movie called Rodan, and despite that being a very popular character in Japan, the English dub constantly calls Rodan Radon or Radon. And it's so jarring to hear that, because it's like, wait, you just reversed the A and the O in the name. That's so weird that you screwed it up like this. In 1993, I knew who the hell Rodan was. I can't believe that anybody who did the English dub of this didn't stop at some point and say, wait, shouldn't this be Rodan instead of Radon? Anyway, while the monsters fight, the scientists end up making off with the egg. What this does is it seems as though Rodan has been fatally wounded, although he does survive. But what it really does is it causes Godzilla to kind of trace the trail of where the scientists are taking this egg, and they end up taking it to Kyoto. Well, the egg oddly enough, kind of radiates different colors based on its mood. When one female scientist, the lead female in this movie called Azusa, when she is not around, the egg radiates red as if it is upset or it's scared. So it's basically already imprinted on this woman. When the egg ends up hatching, it's not a Rodan, it is a baby Godzillasaurus, and it is an adorable little creature. They end up kind of referring to him for the rest of the what I will refer to him for the rest of this episode, and what he is ultimately referred to in the lore is Godzilla Jr. This isn't exactly quite the annoying baby Godzilla that I will eventually get to on this show from the Showa era or the Showa era. This is a little bit different of a creature, but this brings Godzilla to Kyoto, and meanwhile, the G-Force launches Mechagodzilla, and the two Godzillas fight each other, the Mechagodzilla and the original Godzilla. And a lot of Mechagodzilla's weapons are pretty effective, but eventually it gets disabled when Godzilla uses this kind of electrical discharge from its body to disable Mechagodzilla's systems. As Godzilla basically continues on to Kyoto to get his kid, it's determined that that there is a psychic link between Godzilla and Godzilla Jr. That's why Godzilla showed up on the island. It's also why Rodan showed up on the island, and it's why Godzilla is continuing to chase after where they took the kid. The military and scientists at G-Force kind of realized that each Godzilla and Godzillasaurus basically has two brains, one for thinking and one for moving. One's in his head, the other is kind of at the base of his tail or the base of his spine. And if they are able to attack the one that's in the spine, that they could probably immobilize Godzilla to the point where they could probably end up killing the creature, and they can be rid of the menace that is Godzilla. Now, this is when we bring in Miki Sagusa, who appeared in the previous 3 Heisei period movies. And basically, she is there to communicate psychically with the creature, or with the little baby Godzilla creature, and what that ends up doing is it ends up calling Rodan into the city, and they are trying to they're trying to get the baby away from the city as Rodan is kind of attacking, but it ends up destroying the helicopter that's carrying the crate that's got Godzilla Jr. And the lady scientist that he's imprinted on, and Rodan snatches it and plans to basically keep it and protect it, really, is what Rodan is trying to do. However, when Godzilla shows up, it is after Rodan has already faced off with Mechagodzilla. Mechagodzilla seems to have fatally wounded Rodan, finally getting rid of that creature. But when Godzilla shows up, he starts picking up the Mechagodzilla monster and kind of throwing him about. Eventually, G-Force, who has a new trick up its sleeve, combines their Mechagodzilla mech creature with this gunship that's called the Garuda, and it creates Super Mechagodzilla. This is very much part of an era that is born straight out of some of the 70s and 80s ideas that Japanese cartoons and toys had. It's the same idea that gave eventual birth to the Transformers, the idea of these things being able to combine and to create a more powerful version of itself. It was something that was very, very popular in a lot of Japanese media of the era. It's something that certainly would latch on with the kids watching this movie. So what it does is it really does make Mechagodzilla that much more powerful, and it's able to really immobilize Godzilla. When Godzilla Jr. psychically calls for Rodan makes one last flight before he dies, and Mechagodzilla ends up blasting him out of the sky. He falls on top of Godzilla and transfers his life force from himself to Godzilla, which gives Godzilla the ability to heal the butt brain in his body so that he can get back up and essentially destroy Mechagodzilla. But this is something that we see time and time again in these Heisei period movies, which is the transference of this life force. It's something that will play a part in the next movie, and it will definitely play a part in the final movie of this series, which basically wraps up the story not just of Godzilla of this era, but also gives birth to this other story that deals with Godzilla Jr. But we'll get there before this month is out. Godzilla, after destroying Mechagodzilla, tries to approach Godzilla Jr. However, Godzilla Jr. is very frightened of the giant beast, so Mickey has to use her telepathy to communicate to the two of them so that they can, one, understand that, oh, this is my little kid, and I should take him with me wherever I'm going after I leave this town, and for Godzilla Jr. to not be afraid of this creature that can take him and basically raise him properly, because humans can't really raise a Godzillasaurus is the point. Movie ends with some waxing poetic kind of philosophy about creatures caring for their young, and whether or not there will be a dinosaur age after humans are gone, and so on and so forth. But really, the nice thing that happens at the end of this movie is we get to see Godzilla leading his son out into the sea so that they can go off to whatever island they're going to retreat to, and Godzilla can raise his kid as a proper Godzillasaurus. Like I said, this movie really is in the trenches of the Heisei era, and I think it's really the reason why this era of Godzilla movies are my favorite. These are not just individual one-off movies. The Millennium era has a little bit of a problem with that. However, this era, everything is very interconnected, and there is a continuity here. And these movies deal with more than just monster wakes up, rampages through town, has to be chased off into the ocean or destroyed by Godzilla or whatever the case may be. There's a metaphysical concept around the idea of psychics, life force, connection to other living things. I mean, these monsters end up becoming almost like luminous beings, if you will. It's something that is really kind of more interesting and a lot more deeper to really watch, and it helps also get through some of the human elements of the, sometimes the weakest part of every Godzilla movie isn't the effects, isn't the monsters or people in rubber suits or whatever. It's usually the human characters that end up causing some people to kind of find some of these movies to be boring or silly or goofy or whatever. The Heisei period, I think, was the best at melding those two concepts together, movie after movie after movie, and it ends up kind of creating this really cool kind of 10 or 11 year feel to these movies, that they all feel interconnected. They all feel like they're telling the same story, and they're all moving towards what will eventually become, like I said, the death of one Godzilla, but the beginning of a new one. Even though that story isn't picked up, there is a direct continuity between the Godzilla in this movie and Godzilla Jr. as he continues to grow up and become more like his dad. Quite, like, literally. So let me get to my three things I like about Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla II. First and foremost, the Godzilla and Rodan fight at the beginning of this movie is a really good one. It was cool to see Rodan. I had forgotten that he was also in this movie. It was cool to see Rodan playing a big part of this movie. And the fight at the beginning when the egg is discovered is a really good fight. It's a really interesting opportunity to see these creatures really kind of do more than what they had ever done back in the Showa era. And Godzilla, what we do find out about why both of these are being drawn to this particular egg is that Godzilla's and Rodan's have a parasitic relationship. Rodans will or make a nest and lay an egg, and what Godzilla's will do is, like a cuckoo, will drop an egg of their own into that nest. And so if the Godzilla hatches first, it will essentially eat the baby Rodans. This Rodan hatched, grew up, became mutated, became the Rodan that we know, comes back because he thinks that egg he has a kinship with that egg, even though it turns out not to be a Rodan. It turns out to be a Godzilla, and that of course also brings Godzilla. The two fight, and it's a good way to open this movie. It's one of those things that happens pretty quickly in the movie. You don't have to wait around very long to see a couple of monsters kind of come up and start fighting with each other, and it really sets a tone because we start seeing these creatures quite a bit in this movie. That is something that is done very well in this movie, is really kind of up the amount of minutes that we see monsters in this movie. Then the Mechagodzilla scenes are really good. This is not my favorite Mechagodzilla. It's a pretty good one, but of course the original was always my favorite. The original Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla is my favorite of these movies. Maybe not the best one of these movies, but those two, Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla and The Terror of Mechagodzilla, are both, I think, really, really underrated movies in the whole history of Godzilla. But the Mechagodzilla stuff in this movie is really fun. It's, like I said, it's born directly out of those kind of mecha suit ideas like Voltron, like what became Transformers. Before they were the Transformers and sentient robots that we created them over here to be. In Japan, the original series, Microchange and Diaclone were mech suits. They were either really small robots or they were big mech, dumb mech suits that people get in and control and make intelligent. So it's that same idea that's kind of playing into this Mechagodzilla. It's not an alien creature. It's not something that's bad. It's humans trying to protect itself against Godzilla. They find out that it's not good enough. It's they're almost stuck with the idea that, I guess we have to deal with these giant lizards, because when we try to create something to go up against it, it can only win for so long, and we don't take into consideration these other mystical things about these creatures. But it is a cool design. It works very well when it first shows up to take on Godzilla the first time. It's a really cool reveal of the two monsters standing there against each other. It's cool when he comes back and he takes on Rodan and then ends up getting the supercharged, like the super shoulder laser cannons that gets added to him. And they're very well done, and it certainly looks imposing, and it looks like something it could really rightfully be able to stand up to these other monsters on the planet. Finally, like I mentioned, the baby Godzilla Jr., is adorable in this movie. We find out that Godzillosauruses are plant-eating, non-aggressive creatures. It's only when they become mutated that they become the scary monsters that Godzillas are. But there's a personality to this creature. When you see him at when he first hatches, it's very cute and it looks very warm and inviting, even though it's a slimy lizard thing. Later in the movie, at the end, when it's scared of Godzilla, you really think that these are real creatures that are, one looking kind of imposingly down on the youngster, and the youngster looking up very scared and very nervous around it. It almost looks like something that Jim Henson created, and it's like I said, it's not like the annoying Godzilla, baby Godzilla from the 60s. It's so much better than that. It's so much more realistic looking. It actually looks like Godzilla as opposed to what we see or what we've seen before and what we will see in the next series. But it's a good way to kind of rehabilitate a character that is sometimes looked down upon from those 60s appearances of baby Godzilla. This makes this a little bit more human as well, and a little bit something that you can really care a little bit more about because it likes people. You think of this as possibly being that Godzilla from the 60s and 70s that's a hero, and maybe it someday will grow up to be that. But this is a pretty good movie. This is one of my favorite movies of my favorite era of Godzilla movies, so it's definitely worth a look. Alright, so that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. Don't forget to check out new episodes of Film Seizure every Wednesday and a new installment of Monster Mondays each Monday on filmseizure.com. You can find both of those shows in places where you can get your podcasts, like SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Audible, Spotify. We even upload it to YouTube, so you can definitely still listen to it there, subscribe to our YouTube channel and all of that. You can also go over to Facebook and Twitter, and you can follow us by just searching for Film Seizure. Hey, and while you're at it, go over to my website, bmovieenema.com. You can read new text articles each and every Friday morning. You can also follow B Movie Enema on Facebook and Twitter by searching for that. And you can go over to YouTube and subscribe to the B Movie Enema channel, where you can find clips from stuff that I use in the articles when there is something worthy to clip out of movies. But you can also see episodes of my movie hosting show, B Movie Enema the Series. Season number 2 begins September 11th, so be sure to subscribe to that so that you can be ready for that. Until next week, stay spooky.